So let's talk about your life in Cincinnati, what you did when you were there, and your decision to enter medicine.
Well, just getting to Cincinnati, moving to Cincinnati was an adventure for us because we hadn't been out further west in the country, and so we found that quite fascinating. Various ways of travel, partly on land, partly on water. And when we arrived in Cincinnati, we were quite excited to be in a new community, but very shortly afterward, unfortunately, my father died. And he left 9 children. And the 3 oldest daughters, Anna, Marion, and myself, we had to start a school. We had to make sure we could, keep food on the table and keep our home going. So we started a school. Our brothers were young and they couldn't work yet. And taught in that school for 3 or 4 years, I think. And then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't really like the sphere women were being put in. Things were changing around me, and I didn't like the idea that I was expected to get married and, be a nice wife, being able to embroider and play the piano and do those things. I was looking for something more substantive. So I first went to Kentucky and started teaching in Henderson, Kentucky. And then at that point, I actually encountered slavery in Kentucky. And I must admit, I found slavery very repugnant, but I also had difficulty dealing with black people. I was not comfortable at that time.
So with regard to blacks, Dr. Blackwell, you felt conflicted, but that still did not deter you from your strong feelings of being an abolitionist.
Absolutely. I recognized what a terrible thing slavery was, and so I would want to fight it. I had learned right from as a child, and then my first confrontation with it was very difficult for me to deal with. But I would want in the future to make sure that I was helping.
In principle, you were against it and you were willing to work for that, but you did not necessarily feel that you could immerse yourself in the midst of slavery itself.
That's right, yes.
So you returned to Cincinnati.
And I was trying to decide really what I wanted to do. And I had never thought about medicine. What I had thought about medicine was sort of actually repugnant. I thought when people were sick, they were weak. I didn't think studying anatomy was something I was particularly interested in. But one of our friends was a woman, and she had what she called a woman's disease. And I went to see her, and she said, Elizabeth, if I had been treated by a woman doctor, I would have had much less suffering. You're smart. Why don't you study medicine? And it really put into my mind that this may be the route that I should pursue. But to do that how was I going to do that?
And so, in some ways, you were looking for a cause. You were looking for a life apart from the traditional role of a woman in society at that time.
That's right. I was not trying to get married. In fact, my grandmother Blackwell, I remember sitting down with her, and she told us about how constricting marriage was. She was very discouraging, and in fact, there are 5 girls in the family, and none of us ever married. So I was looking for an insuperable barrier to marriage, and medicine was an option, but I still needed to figure out how I could afford to go to school.
And so you combined your skill with teaching with your goal of going to medical school by finding ways to earn money and learn at the same time.
Yes. In those days, most people did not go to medical school. The early physicians in the United States apprenticed themselves. And I didn't think that was the right way. I wanted to go to a legitimate medical school and graduate, which was becoming more common, but not for women. But to do so, I needed to make some money. So I went to North Carolina first, and the idea was I would earn my living by teaching, but I would board with a physician so that I could learn from the physician and study from his books and talk about medicine with him and see. So I did that both in North Carolina and then in South Carolina.
And were they supportive, these doctors?
They were supportive of the concept of my going to medical school, yes, but they could not figure out how I was going to get that. They didn't even think it was possible. In fact, it was suggested to me by one physician that I just don male clothing and go off to Paris and go to medical school.
And that really didn't get at the point.
No, the point was I wanted to open the profession of medicine to women, and I was willing to be the first person to try. Yes.
And so you then traveled back to Philadelphia.
I went to Philadelphia. I met a very kind physician who guided me in what I should be doing for application. I applied, I think it was about to 27 medical schools, something like that, and was rejected by all of them in Boston and all of them in New York. And so he suggested to me that I apply to a small school in upstate New York, in Geneva, New York, Geneva Medical College. So I did.